Hello and welcome to Practical Buddhist Coaching. I'm Carl, and in each video I explore early Buddhist ideas in a grounded and practical way, focused on how we can apply it to actual day-to-day life. Now, everything that I teach is centered around a simple model that maps the Buddha's insights from the Pali Canon. Suffering and mental stress isn't just about what happens to us, it's also about our conditioned mind, how it reacts and interprets what we experience. And the good news is that that reaction can be seen, understood and recognized, and with practice and tools can be let go of. And then we can experience our experiences without reactions and just see them as they are. And one of the key tools in doing exactly that, freeing ourselves of the reactions of the conditioned mind, is, of course, mindfulness. Now, mindfulness is often confused with awareness, so let's clarify. Awareness is your ability to notice what is happening right now in your body, senses, and mind as it happens. Mindfulness can be seen as remembering. It's more reflexive, or in other words, it's the capacity to reflect on what happened in the past. It's like an active replay of what just happened. And this reflection and this memory of what happened in the past brings us more context and clarity to our experience. So I may experience this camera and this light on me now, and I can be aware of that right now with presence in this moment. And then I may notice that I have an unease about that experience. And so with mindfulness, I can backtrack and think what it was about that experience that I had an automatic reaction to and where my unease started. And that's why mindfulness is so useful. And for this reason, in my coaching model, I introduce mindfulness early, in stage 1, fundamental wisdom, because it's essential in seeing how unnecessary passion and reactivity arise from all the habits that we have developed from our learned experiences and from the conditioned mind. And the conditioned mind, if you're not familiar, stores all of our core beliefs, opinions, preferences, and all of our survival brain's habits. And then it automatically weighs up our current experiences based on the store. And so we think that we are the ones reacting, but actually what it is, it's the conditioned mind, which is. And the conditioned mind automatically involves and creates a drive around what we experience. And so then everything becomes a bit overstimulating. In my program in stage 3, which is shamatha, we refine what we learn about mindfulness in stage 1. And in stage 2, which is renunciation, where we're mindful of things like intentions. And in stage 3, we refine it to open it up to be able to be mindful of the body, because unnecessary passion can often sit in the body. And in fact, there are so many things that we can be mindful of. Mindfulness of the body, of course, includes mindfulness of the breath. And also we can be mindful of where we're holding tension in the body. We can be mindful of when we're holding the breath, when the breath is tight. And we can use that information to release the body and release the breath. We can be mindful of the senses, and that's a very important part of renunciation, is that if we're able to have the senses are very triggering. So if we're able to be mindful of the senses in real time, we can prevent our senses running away and creating a reaction. So if I'm mindful that my senses are drawing me towards chocolate bars, then I recognize that using mindfulness. Then I can begin to prepare the calming process, the shamatha, the renunciation, which allows me not to follow that passion down a path I don't want to go. And that's the wisdom and that's the discernment that we build through stage 1 all the way through to stage 4. And so there are a lot of different types of mindfulness. And in stage 4, we complete this picture of mindfulness of senses, mindfulness of body, mindfulness of preferences, such as liking and disliking. We can also be mindful of intentions and renunciation, mindfulness of breathing, which we do in shamatha, stage 3. But in stage 4, we learn and go over the Buddha's teaching of dependent origination. And this really brings our mindfulness to a point of completeness. Because whilst we can be mindful of body, senses, and mind, the final thing that we need to be able to be mindful of, and we leave it to stage 4 because otherwise it's just too much, is how the conditioned mind works. And very briefly, I'll explain it here. The conditioned mind works in a loop, which is self-fulfilling and self-feeding. It starts off with that core memory bank it has of various core beliefs, various preferences that it's stored, opinions that it's stored. And we can think of these as seeds because they lie dormant. But they can be triggered by our experiences in the present. And so those triggers obviously would be the senses: eyes, ears, taste, smell, body, feeling. And then, of course, the mind can also just bring up things. And so those are all potential triggers. But once we're triggered and the seed begins to grow, it's kept alive by the ego. And we can think of that as the maintaining factor. So for instance, I might see a cat, and my conditioned mind may say, I like cats. And so then in comes the maintenance, that we identify that that cat is something that we like, and therefore we now have an attachment to the cat. We get involved with it, and we might decide to take it home and make it our pet. And so that's the involvement of ego, which tends to identify and tends to merge itself into the story, create the story. I found a cat and now it's my cat. I'm not saying here that owning cats is bad, but it's just an example. And so that loop works through the seed that is buried, the conditioned mind and its beliefs and its preferences, which get triggered by the senses in the mind and then get maintained by the ego, the sense of self that we have. But through meditation and through contemplation, we can begin to realize that the ego is just a construct. There's nothing that you particularly are when you really look at it. You may see yourself as a teacher, but that's just a mental construct. You're more than a teacher. You also sometimes are the teacher. I don't want to get too much into those sorts of things, but hopefully you can take away the idea of dependent origination. We can be mindful of the ego, we can be mindful of our triggers, and we can be mindful of the seeds of the conditioned mind. And when we can do those things, our mindfulness is complete. And that teaching helps us see how our passion is perpetuated and how it loops. And then we can begin to understand how holding on to unhelpful core beliefs, being easily triggered by our experiences, can really get us caught. And how it can be all maintained by our sense of ownership and the stories that we create about our experiences. So at first, in terms of mindfulness and being mindful of the various ways, which is what I'm talking about, the various ways that unnecessary passion, or in Buddhism you would traditionally call it craving, appears. It appears in those tight muscles. It appears when you are holding your breath. It appears as the tension. It appears as the triggering of your senses. And then it becomes that sense of liking or disliking. And then you start to have all these thoughts. I don't want this. You start to create a story about it. I do want it, I don't want it. I can do this. I could control the situation in this way. And then you act. And then the next thing you know, you're fully involved in creating a whole bunch of action around a very simple experience, which maybe didn't require it. So when we train in samadhi in stage 4, mindfulness has become so well developed, it's like a background app. It runs quietly, but just alerts you quietly and softly when it's aware that unnecessary passion has arisen. And then it alerts you to what's going on. And you have trained yourself in wisdom to determine unnecessary passion from necessary passion. So it's not like you're going around always triggered. When you're just living your life, getting the food you need, having the relationships you need, looking after yourself, then mindfulness is not triggered. But then when you suddenly have this urge to have control, mindfulness goes off and says, that's unnecessary passion. And then in samadhi we have the acronym of readiness. And if you're interested in learning it more, you can follow my course or just subscribe here. But it involves recognizing, seeing unnecessary passion, enduring it without acting on it, accepting that this loop has occurred, but seeing the loop as D for dangerous. I is investigating what is the core belief that underlies it. And then we're able, when we see those core beliefs and the triggers, we can see that that loop is automatic and it's not real as such. It's a suggestion. It's empty. It's just a part of the brain making a suggestion, and then you can let it go. And you don't have to follow it. So this all connects directly to the bigger problem that my model addresses and that the Buddha wants to address. And that we can fall into this trap of filtering life through a conditioned mind, that we can be full of unchecked habits, beliefs, expectations, passions, and a drive which is actually harmful for us. And conditioning can create passion, it can create craving and resisting and striving, and we can get caught in those cycles for years. And what's unfortunate about it is that none of those beliefs, those opinions, and those preferences may have actually genuinely been ours. They may have been things that we have taken on board from the past. And the problem, as our model also explains, is that when passions hit the hard edges of reality, as shown at the bottom of the diagram, change, sickness, aging, death, we suffer. Because when we have high expectations and those expectations are not met, that is extremely uncomfortable. And if you observe your life, you'll see that that's always the case. Whenever you're in unease, an expectation has not been met. So the rationale here is better not to have the expectation in the first place, if possible. So the Buddha's path is not to change life, but to change the mind and allow the mind to align with the reality of our situation. And the reality of our situation is change, aging, sickness, and death at any time without our consent. And so mindfulness plays a central role in how we build wisdom, how we retrain, how we respond to our experiences, how we change the inclination of our mind. It helps us recognize passion. It helps us to calm the mind through shamatha. and we see through patterns that cause pain. This is how we stop reacting blindly and how we start responding wisely. Now, these teachings matter because they offer a clearer path to a simpler and more peaceful life, to a mind that's not constantly tugged by every thought or trigger, a mind that has more room to breathe. And whilst I hope you find this talk useful, the real teaching comes in the doing. So if this resonated, try observing your day a little differently. Watch how passion shows up. Notice how reflection or mindfulness can guide you, and then you can look at things with discernment. You can differentiate unnecessary passion from necessary passion, and then you can begin with wisdom to discern which path and what you want to follow and what you want to let go of. If you'd like a more structured guidance to all of this content, to the model and how to put the model into action rather than simply just understanding, but the actual application, you'll find details about my practical Buddhist coaching course in the links that I've provided. As always, I hope this has been helpful. I'd like to thank you for your attention, and I wish you happiness and wellness.